Marcus had been walking the same corridors of Titan Tech Corporation for 5 years. Every evening, when the boardrooms emptied and the fluorescent lights flickered, he moved silently with his mop and bucket, cleaning every corner of the office. To most people, Marcus was invisible. He wore the same faded uniform every night, and his skin-darkened hands were always wet from scrubbing floors or wiping down counters. People rarely noticed him. If they did, it was only a passing glance, or a hurried nod. No one asked about his life, his struggles, or his dreams. But Marcus noticed everyone. He saw the fatigue in the receptionist's eyes when she answered endless calls. He saw the tension in the suits hurrying through the hallways, their phones glued to their ears. He saw the way employees avoided conflict, how they smiled politely, but their hearts were racing with stress. And lately, he had been noticing something far more concerning, something that made his chest tighten with worry. It was Mr. Leonard Hayes, the billionaire CEO, sitting behind his polished mahogany desk, reviewing reports late into the night. Marcus had cleaned this office countless times, yet he had begun to notice details no one else seemed to see. Leonard's hands would tremble slightly as he sipped his coffee. He would pause mid-sentence during video calls, closing his eyes for just a moment, as if he were trying to catch his breath. His face, always so confident and composed during the day, had started showing faint lines of stress and exhaustion. Marcus remembered the day his father had died of a sudden heart attack. He had been young, barely old enough to understand death fully, but old enough to remember the subtle signs, the sudden fatigue, the pale complexion, the way his father would lean against a counter for support without explaining why. Those signs were now haunting him in the form of Mr. Hayes. He had learned that sometimes people in power ignored the smallest warnings, thinking they were invincible. But Marcus knew better. He had no right to interfere, no title, no authority, and certainly no place in the world of CEOs and million-dollar contracts. Yet every evening, he lingered a little longer outside Mr. Hayes's office, pretending to fix the floor while his eyes were fixed on the CEO. He noticed the brief wince as Leonard rubbed his chest. He noticed the shallow breaths, the stiffness in his posture, the moments of weakness no one else cared to see. Sometimes, Marcus would catch himself imagining a worst-case scenario. What if Leonard Hayes collapsed right there on the office floor? What if no one knew CPR? No one knew how to act quickly? The thought made Marcus shiver, but it also made his resolve stronger. He couldn't let fear keep him silent. His father's death had taught him the importance of noticing the small things before they became tragedies. Despite knowing he would likely be brushed aside or ignored, Marcus made a silent promise. He would pay attention. He would remember every detail. He would act if he ever needed to. No one else seemed to care, but Marcus did. It was a lonely job. Few smiled at him sincerely, and fewer knew his name. He lived in a small apartment with peeling paint on the walls and a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Money was always tight, and yet he carried a pride in himself that came from quiet courage, the kind that did not ask for recognition. In a world obsessed with status and wealth, Marcus knew his worth in the value of seeing, of noticing, of caring when others looked away. That night, as the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the empty office, Marcus paused outside the CEO's door. Leonard Hayes was hunched over his reports, head resting on one hand, eyes tired and strained. Marcus's heart ached. He whispered to himself, almost as if speaking to the universe, "Don't ignore this. Don't ignore yourself, sir." And then, as always, he returned to his work. The floors needed mopping, the trash needed emptying, and the night awaited its silent guardian. Marcus didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. He would keep watching, keep noticing, and keep caring. Because sometimes, the person no one notices is the one who can save the day. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Titan Tech before dawn. The building was quiet, still cloaked in shadows, except for the faint hum of the elevators warming up. As he pushed his mop across the polished floor, his eyes kept darting toward the CEO's office. He didn't mean to spy, he simply couldn't help it. He remembered the way Leonard Hayes had winced the night before, the slight tremor in his hands, the exhaustion etched across his face at first. Marcus thought it might be stress. After all, Leonard ran one of the largest corporations in the world. Stress came with the territory. But deep down, Marcus knew it was more than that. There was something in the CEO's posture, the way he gripped the edge of his desk, the shallow breaths he tried to hide behind his tie. Marcus's father had shown the same signs just days before his heart attack. He remembered vividly the pale lips, the sweaty forehead, and the subtle stiffness in the chest. And now he saw it again in Leonard Hayes. By mid-morning, employees had started trickling in. They were busy with calls, emails, and meetings, their shoes clicking against the tile floors. They barely noticed Marcus, just as usual. And they certainly didn't notice Leonard's fading color or the quick clutch to his chest when the phone rang. Someone commented, "He must be really stressed about the merger," while another shrugged, "He always works like this. That's just him." But Marcus felt a pit in his stomach. He remembered the feeling he had had when he realized his father was sick, the helplessness, the fear of being too late. He thought about how many people ignored warning signs simply because they didn't want to bother someone powerful. "Power doesn't make you invincible," Marcus whispered to himself as he polished a desk nearby. "It just makes people blind to danger." By noon, Marcus noticed something new. Leonard Hayes was sweating more than usual, and he had stopped talking mid-conversation with a board member. He held his chest for just a second before brushing it off. Marcus froze in the hallway, bucket in hand. He could hear the faint heartbeat echoing in his memory, the one that had warned him too late about his father. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Marcus wanted to speak up. He wanted to knock on the office door and say, "Sir, you're not okay. You need help." But every time he opened his mouth, the words died in his throat. How could a janitor warn a billionaire CEO? How could he break through the invisible walls of status and pride? Every instinct told him to stay silent, to keep cleaning and avoid trouble. But another, stronger voice inside him refused to remain quiet. He had seen enough to know that ignoring this could cost a life. The afternoon passed slowly. Marcus kept observing, moving through the office floors, pretending to sweep and mop, all the while keeping a careful watch. Every cough, every pause, every hand clutching the chest, tightened his chest with worry. He could see that Leonard was forcing himself to continue, as if nothing were wrong. But Marcus could read the silent messages his body was sending. At 5:00, Marcus finally paused near the CEO's office. Leonard had slumped slightly over his desk, rubbing his chest again. Marcus swallowed hard, knowing that if this continued, it might escalate to something life-threatening. He remembered his father's words, though faint in memory. Notice the signs. Don't wait for disaster. With a deep breath, Marcus whispered to himself, "I have to do something. I can't let him become another story." That night, Marcus stayed later than usual. He wiped the floors carefully, but his mind was with the man inside the office. He kept imagining the worst-case scenario, the one where no one intervened, where pride and ignorance led to tragedy. Marcus clenched his fists, determination blazing in his chest. He would act if he had to. He didn't yet know how. He only knew that he couldn't ignore it. For Marcus, watching silently was no longer enough. Someone had to notice. Someone had to care. And tonight, he would be that someone. That evening the office was quieter than usual. Most employees had left early, tired from the endless demands of a corporate empire. Marcus was finishing up in the lobby when he noticed that Leonard Hayes's office light was still on. He paused with his mop mid-swipe, heart tightening. Something inside him said he couldn't leave without checking. Marcus walked down the hallway slowly, trying to make it look accidental, but every step felt heavy. The door was slightly ajar, and he saw Leonard slumped over his desk, a hand pressed against his chest. His tie was loosened, his forehead damp with sweat. Marcus's stomach churned. He had seen this exact position before, the way his father had leaned against the counter the night before he was rushed to the hospital. Marcus hesitated. "Sir," he said softly, unsure if he should speak. Maybe you should see a doctor." Leonard raised his eyes, surprised at the janitor's presence. He forced a smile, weak and dismissive. "Marcus, I'm fine. Go back to your work, please." Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist, to say, "I've seen this before. You're not fine." But he swallowed the words. Years of being invisible had taught him that speaking up could be ignored or worse, ridiculed. Yet he couldn't walk away. "Not this time. Sir, I know you're busy, but these symptoms, they could be dangerous," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. I've seen it before. My father, his words caught in his throat. "You need to check yourself, please." Leonard leaned back, exhaling slowly. He looked tired, but pride and disbelief kept him rigid. "Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but I'm okay. I have doctors, assistants, people to handle everything. I don't need advice from a janitor." Marcus's hands shook. He had expected resistance, but this level of denial made his heart race. He had seen too much, noticed too much, and knew what could happen if no one acted. He swallowed his fear and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, I don't care about titles, money, or who notices. I care about your life. Please, don't ignore this. You might not feel it now, but it's serious. I've learned what it looks like when someone collapses. I don't want to see that happen to you." Leonard's eyes softened for a moment, the first real pause Marcus had seen. There was a flicker of doubt, of uncertainty. But the next second, pride returned like a shield. He straightened his posture, brushing off the concern. "Marcus, really? I'm fine," he said, standing. "I appreciate your loyalty, truly. But you need to focus on your work. That's your job, isn't it?" Marcus's shoulders slumped slightly, disappointment and fear mixing into a bitter taste. He nodded and turned back to his mop, pretending to be busy. But inside, panic gnawed at him. He knew that time was running out. The warning signs were getting worse. Every slight pause, every sudden cough, every hand on the chest was a countdown he could no longer ignore. For the rest of the night, Marcus stayed nearby, moving silently through the office, pretending to clean. But he watched Leonard every moment, heart pounding. He memorized the slight twitches, the shallow breaths, the moments when the CEO's hand would instinctively go to his chest. Marcus's mind raced with everything he had learned from the night his father fell ill. He couldn't let history repeat itself. Not here, not now. As the clock ticked past midnight, Marcus whispered to himself, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights, "I can't let you ignore this. Not anymore. Someone has to act. If you collapse and no one is ready, it's too late." He didn't yet know exactly what he would do, but one thing was certain, he could no longer stay invisible. The choice was no longer about a janitor and a CEO. It was about life and death. And Marcus had decided he would act, no matter what. There was a Tuesday afternoon, and Titan Tech's boardroom buzzed with tension. The executives were gathered for a high-stakes meeting that could decide the company's future. Leonard Hayes sat at the head of the long polished table, his suit perfectly tailored, his tie straight, and his expression calm at least on the surface. But Marcus, silently mopping the hallway outside, noticed the small tells no one else did. Leonard's hand trembled ever so slightly as he lifted a glass of water. His face was pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He coughed and rubbed his chest, but nobody noticed. The executives were too busy arguing about numbers, projections, and mergers. They laughed, shook their heads, and typed on laptops. Unaware of the danger inches away from them, Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He had warned Leonard before, but the CEO's pride had dismissed him. Marcus clenched his fists. He had a feeling that today would be the day when warnings could no longer be ignored. Minutes later, as Leonard leaned back to make a point in the meeting, his face contorted. His eyes widened in sudden shock. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath, and collapsed forward onto the table. Papers flew into the air. Glasses shattered. Chairs toppled over. The room erupted in chaos. "Call an ambulance." Someone screamed. "Get him water. Get a doctor." Another shouted. Executives panicked, stepping back, unsure of what to do. Phones were fumbled, and confusion reigned. Marcus pushed through the crowd. He knelt beside the CEO, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline rushing through him. He felt the irregular, faint pulse and recognized the unmistakable signs of a serious cardiac event. Sir, stay with me," Marcus shouted, shaking Leonard's shoulder gently, but firmly. "You're going to be okay. Don't give up." Someone muttered. Who is he?" Marcus ignored them. Every second counted. He positioned his hands correctly on Leonard's chest and began CPR, counting steadily in his mind. He remembered the training he had taken in the community years ago. His father's death had taught him the importance of timing, precision, and courage. Leonard's body convulsed slightly with each compression. Marcus leaned over him, whispering words of encouragement, even though the CEO could barely hear him. "You're strong. You've survived bigger battles than this. Fight. Just fight." Minutes felt like hours. Marcus refused to pause. Sweat dripped down his face and soaked his uniform, but he didn't stop. Finally, he felt a subtle change. The pulse grew stronger, more regular. Leonard's lips moved, and a faint cough escaped him. The paramedics had arrived, rushing forward to take over. Marcus stepped back, chest heaving, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. One of the paramedics looked at him, astonished. "How long were you?" "I started immediately," Marcus said simply, wiping his hands on a towel. "I couldn't wait." Leonard was lifted onto the stretcher, still weak, but alive. Marcus followed behind, silently watching as the man who had ignored him so often now depended entirely on him. He felt a strange combination of pride and humility. Pride for saving a life. Humility because it was simply the right thing to do. As the ambulance doors closed, Marcus whispered to himself, barely audible over the sirens, "You're going to be okay now. You're safe." For the first time in his life, Marcus realized that being invisible didn't mean powerless. He had acted when no one else would, and he had made a difference. He had saved a life, and that truth settled in his chest like a steady heartbeat of quiet triumph. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and worry. Marcus followed quietly behind the paramedics as they wheeled Leonard Hayes into the emergency room. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, their voices clipped and urgent. Marcus stayed near the doorway, hands clasped together, heart pounding in his chest. He felt small in the midst of so much authority, yet strangely necessary. Leonard lay on the stretcher, pale and weak, his chest rising and falling with effort. Marcus could see the fear in his eyes, fear that came not from wealth or power, but from the sudden fragility of life itself. For the first time, the CEO was no longer untouchable. He was human. One of the doctors looked at Marcus, surprised. "Did you perform CPR?" Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, immediately. I couldn't wait. He needed help." The doctor's eyes widened, but there was no time for questions. They began working on Leonard, monitoring his heart, giving him oxygen, preparing him for further treatment. Marcus stood back, silently hoping his instincts had been right. He remembered every detail: the tremor in Leonard's hand, the shallow breaths, the way his chest had tightened, and he realized how close they had come to losing him. Hours passed. Marcus waited in the quiet corner of the hospital, mopping at the small lobby floor just to keep his hands busy. He thought about the last 5 years, the long nights, the cleaning, the invisibility. He thought about how he had watched, noticed, and cared, even when no one else had. He had risked embarrassment, rejection, and dismissal to speak up, and now it had saved a life. Finally, Leonard's eyes fluttered open. The pale gray of fear had faded, replaced by the recognition of survival. He looked around, groaning softly, until his gaze landed on Marcus, standing silently at the side of the room. The recognition hit him like a thunderclap. You saved me," Leonard said, his voice hoarse, trembling with emotion. I ignored the signs. I should have listened, and you acted." Marcus shook his head slightly, humility written across his face. "I just did what anyone should, sir. Someone had to notice. Someone had to act." Leonard's hands shook as he tried to sit up, but Marcus moved quickly, steadying him. For the first time, the CEO felt powerless and, for the first time, he realized the true value of people who usually went unseen. Marcus had no title, no wealth, no influence, and yet he had done more for Leonard's life than anyone else in that boardroom could have imagined. "I owe you my life," Leonard said again, tears forming in his eyes. "Not because you cleaned floors or moved silently through corridors, but because you saw, you cared. You acted when everyone else ignored the signs." Marcus smiled faintly, his own eyes misting. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. Don't let pride or work keep you from noticing your own health. That's all I ask." Leonard nodded solemnly, a newfound respect settling over him. He realized that life could be fragile, no matter how much power or money one had, and he realized that heroism did not always wear a suit or carry a title. Sometimes it came in the form of a quiet, unnoticed janitor who had the courage to speak up. As the medical team continued their work, Marcus quietly left the room, feeling a strange mix of relief, pride, and exhaustion. He returned to the empty lobby, picked up his mop, and resumed his work. To anyone else, he was just the janitor. But Marcus knew the truth. Tonight, he had made a difference that mattered more than any paycheck or recognition ever could. Outside, the night was calm, the city lights reflecting faintly through the hospital windows. Marcus paused for a moment, thinking of his father, of the warnings he had ignored, of the life he had lost. He whispered softly, "I didn't fail this time. I saved him." And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt truly seen, not by the world, but by the life he had fought to protect. The next morning, Titan Tech's offices were unusually quiet. Employees whispered in small clusters, rumors spreading like wildfire. Everyone had heard about what had happened to Leonard Hayes the night before. The billionaire CEO, the untouchable Titan of industry, had almost died, and someone had saved him. Marcus arrived early, as always, moving through the halls with his mop and bucket. He noticed the subtle glances from employees who usually ignored him. Heads turned slightly when he passed. Some smiled awkwardly, unsure how to acknowledge him. He didn't respond. He had learned long ago that recognition, while nice, was not the reason he acted. He kept his focus on the floors, on the hallways, on his work. But inside, his chest carried a quiet satisfaction, a relief that the man he had watched over was alive. Then Leonard appeared. The doors to the executive suite opened, and the CEO stepped out, still recovering, but upright and determined. His eyes immediately found Marcus, and something unspoken passed between them. Leonard's usual confident demeanor was softened, replaced with gratitude and humility. He walked toward Marcus, stopping just a few feet away. "Marcus," Leonard said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I need to thank you, not just for what you did last night, but for seeing me when no one else did, for caring when everyone else ignored the warning signs. You saved my life." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. He looked down, shaking his head slightly. "Sir, I just did what I thought was right, Anyone could have done the same. Leonard shook his head. No, not anyone. Not anyone would have acted. Not anyone would have been brave enough to speak up when they were dismissed, when pride and titles told them to stay invisible. You have courage, Marcus. True courage. For a moment, Marcus felt uncomfortable under the attention. Employees had stopped their work, watching the exchange, sensing the significance of the moment. Leonard continued, his voice growing firmer. I want you to know that I see you. I see your dedication, your care, your loyalty. You are more than a janitor, Marcus. You are a lifesaver, a hero. And from this day forward, I want to make sure your voice is heard in this company. Marcus blinked, unable to fully comprehend the words. He had never expected anything like this. Recognition, promotions, titles, none of that mattered to him. But hearing Leonard Hayes, the man he had protected with his actions, speak with sincerity, it was overwhelming. The employees began to murmur, some clapping quietly, others nodding with respect. Marcus realized that for the first time in years, he was no longer invisible. Not because of wealth, status, or ceremony, but because he had acted with integrity when it mattered most. Leonard placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. I'm assigning you as my personal safety advisor, he said, a hint of a smile on his lips. You will oversee the health and safety of this office. No one will ever ignore warning signs again. You have earned this trust, Marcus, not with a title or a degree, but with your courage and your heart. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time, he understood the power of quiet vigilance, of seeing the world not for what it shows, but for what it hides. He realized that heroism doesn't always wear a cape or sit in a boardroom. Sometimes, it wears a simple uniform, sweeps the floors, and notices the small things that save lives. Leonard walked away, but his eyes continued to find Marcus from across the office, silently acknowledging the debt of gratitude he could never fully repay. Marcus returned to his work, a small smile on his face. The floors needed cleaning, the hallways needed mopping, but for the first time, the work felt lighter. He had not only saved a life, but he had also changed the way people saw him and, perhaps, the way they saw the meaning of courage, respect, and humanity. Outside the window, sunlight streamed into the office, glinting off the polished floors. Marcus paused for a moment, mop in hand, and whispered to himself, sometimes, being invisible is the perfect place to see the truth. Days passed after Leonard Hayes' near-death experience. Titan Tech was never quite the same. The employees, who once ignored Marcus, now greeted him with polite nods, quiet smiles, and sometimes even small words of gratitude. The whispers of the janitor who saved the CEO echoed through the halls, but Marcus barely noticed. Recognition wasn't why he acted. He cared because it was the right thing to do, and because he had seen what others refused to see. Leonard, meanwhile, was changed in ways no boardroom meeting could ever measure. He had always been a man driven by numbers, deals, and ambition. But now he understood something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in profits or contracts. He understood the fragile, precious nature of life, and the value of those who watched, listened, and acted when it mattered most. One morning, Leonard called Marcus to his office. The janitor stepped inside, mop in hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Leonard gestured to a chair. Sit, he said. His voice was calm but carried a sincerity that Marcus had never heard before. I've been thinking, Leonard began, about what happened, about how close I came to losing everything, even my life, and about you. I realized that while I was busy looking at reports and profits, someone who had no reason to care, cared more about my life than anyone else. Marcus lowered his eyes, shrugging slightly. I just did what anyone should, sir. Leonard shook his head. No, Marcus, not anyone. Most people would have ignored it. Most people are too busy, too afraid, too proud. But you acted. You saved me. And that makes all the difference in the world. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected this. He had never thought his actions would matter beyond the quiet satisfaction of doing what was right. But now, seeing Leonard's gratitude, he understood something more. His courage had value beyond the floors he cleaned, beyond the walls he polished. It had power. From that day on, Leonard made changes throughout TitanTech. Health checks became mandatory for employees. Safety training was prioritized. And Leonard personally ensured that Marcus's voice and observations were respected. But more than that, Leonard carried a personal lesson, a reminder to see beyond titles, beyond wealth, beyond status. He had been blind before, but Marcus had opened his eyes. Marcus continued his nightly rounds, mopping the floors and emptying the trash, but he walked taller now, not with arrogance, but with quiet pride. He realized that heroism doesn't always wear a cape, doesn't always sit in a boardroom, and doesn't always command attention. Sometimes, it wears a simple uniform, moves silently through the night, and notices the small things that can save a life. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Marcus paused in the hallway. Leonard passed by, nodding respectfully, a rare smile on his face. "Thank you," Leonard whispered, not for the first time, but now in a way that Marcus felt deep in his heart. Marcus smiled faintly. "Just take care of yourself, sir," he said. "That's all I ask." Leonard nodded, the lessons of that night etched into his mind forever. He had seen, firsthand, that human life is fragile, that pride can be dangerous, and that courage can come from the most unexpected places. He vowed never to ignore the quiet voices around him again. Marcus returned to his work, mop in hand, moving through the halls with the same care and attention as always. He was still the janitor, still unseen by most, but now he understood the truth he had always known. Being invisible didn't mean powerless. One person, watching, noticing, and acting, could change everything, and in that quiet, unnoticed power, Marcus found his purpose, his pride, and his humanity. He had saved a life, changed the world, and reminded everyone that sometimes, the smallest actions have the greatest impact. The city lights glimmered outside the windows, reflecting on the polished floors. Marcus paused, taking a deep breath. He whispered to himself, a quiet mantra he had lived by for years. Sometimes, seeing is all it takes, and sometimes, one person's courage can save a life. And with that, he continued walking, silently, steadily, the invisible hero who had become unforgettable.